All right. So I'm joined today by Lucas Pires and from, let's see, CheckSec. Is that
Yep,
correct? So thank you for joining today.
no problem.
And we got in contact on Twitter, and basically you mentioned that you've been using HTMX for years.
Yeah,
HTMX is relatively new. So, a lot of people who've been using it, it's like a month, couple months, or since
yeah,
it got really big. So this is something I feel like you're now one of the OGs, one of the original HTMX users here.
yeah. Like the first time I heard about HTMX was, I believe, Django Con 2021, and like at the first interaction, it's always weird. So you think this is very strange, like copy pasting like HTML. But after some talks, especially from conferences, especially the Holy Grail, where I believe a company converted an entire application from React to HTMX. At the time, at the company I was working, we started to pay more attention. And since most of the work we did was, let's say, very CRUD based, so administrative applications, back office management, data pipelines, there was no need for excessive UI, let's say. Something very just simple MPAs will do the trick.
Yep.
But of course, sometimes we'll have some necessity for what we feel with the same, let's say, effort, because we were a small team. So there wasn't a very like budget for having front end and back end uh,
Yeah.
to build something that will be better than your usual run of the mill MPA. So we started doing smaller implementations until having complete projects built around the hypermedia approach
Yep.
and using HTMX completely. So yeah,
Interesting. So before we get into some of the details of that, one of the big picture things I'm kind of noticing here is that I would say the Django world, and
yeah.
Django Con, it's come up several times in talking about HTMX stuff. Um, do you feel like there's kind of a natural pull in the Django community for this stuff, or what's sort of going on there? What's your take on
So
on
like
that?
if you look at other similar frameworks like Rails, Livewire, stuff like that. Django doesn't have anything like that. It just has plain templates, HTML templates, where you can insert your Django ORM data. HTMX really like clicked for Django because and FastAPI, other Python frameworks, because it filled that gap. Django doesn't have a native, let's say, REST API, so you'll need an extra package for that. So when you're building APIs, that's very common, building APIs in Django, but it's not out of the box. And Django is a framework out of the box, like it provides you templating, ORM, middlewares, all those features, but it doesn't
Yeah.
provide you like an easy way to do REST. You'll need an external package. You'll need to learn an entire new tooling, right? And I guess like you can take full advantage of Django when using REST. And when using REST, no, when you're using an API, you're not using the template layer. And I think a lot of people notice that even for the most, let's say, CRUD applications like data management, back office, administrative things, you don't need a fully featured SPA. You just need a good looking, no page loading, let's say hypermedia approach, and it's very easy to prototype and to get to let's say proof of concept. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting because you're talking about the different frameworks. Like I come from a Laravel,
Yeah.
which I would sort of put in the same class as Django and Rails, and there's all these sort of large backend frameworks with different languages. And yeah, Laravel has Livewire, which kind of gives you that from the backend hypermedia approach with some Ajax. It's got a different approach than HTMX, and then Rails has Hotwire. This is like the official approved DHH, stuff that basically HTML over the wire, similar kind of concept. And yeah, so the ones that have really sort of seems like embraced HTMX the most are Go seems like kind of goes with it,
Yeah.
and Python and Django. So I guess that makes sense if it's kind of filling that void of like we want to use this backend framework, but we do not want to build an SPA and do React View.
Like, I'm not saying this works for all applications, right? When you have a lot of client-side states, you can't go the hypermedia way, or you can go if you encapsulate certain elements. For example, a common pattern. When you have, let's say, a wizard form with multiple pages, right? And you have a certain page that has a lot of interactivity, a lot of client state, needs to save a lot. Maybe the hypermedia way isn't the better, but that shouldn't stop you from using the hypermedia way. You can just encapsulate that page into a web component or a bit of Alpine JS. And I think like Django allows very, very quick development, and especially on small companies. You sometimes you can't have like the dedicated front end team, dedicated back end team. So having the control over both sides, because even on larger corporations, then you have like the communication side between the front end team, back end team. There's a lot of resources that can be eliminated with using this approach.
Yeah.
Even like I also do freelance work for small companies, like also management software, and it's a one-man job. So backend, UI, infrastructure, meetings with customers, and for a single person, like maybe I don't know because I don't have that kind of experience, but 10, 15 years ago, it will be a easy job, like for one person, maybe using PHP, something like that. But right now, like developing a complete backend with front-end application and doing it in a quick and reasonable, let's say, schedule can be a bit tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you do a project like that, do you get to choose your tech stack generally, or does it kind of depend on the client and depend on the person?
So in terms of freelance, usually I choose the tech stack. However, like some requirements push me outside of the boundaries. Like when I started working, I started learning React. Then I switched since I saw front end is not my thing. I'm going to Django. Uh, I started learning React, but I've never touched it for years. But recently, I had, let's say, a need to do a mobile app, and I ended up going for React. But it's a bit of a basis, depends on the customer's requirements. But when it's web based, I usually go for Django HTMX always.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, except for the Django part, I'm in the Laravel world, but same sort of deal for me. It's like if I get to choose that tech stack, that's my current one. So what's your general role? You said, so you do your freelance stuff, so you do some stuff on the side. What's the company you work for, and is it something that's your company, or is it someone's company that you work for, and sort of what's your role there?
I usually we work with like the InfoSec market, so security companies. We do software for managing and pen tests, managing pen test reporting, and all sorts of communication between like pen test teams and security firms and their clients.
What are you saying there? Pentas?
Yeah, like pen test reportings. So if you have a company that does InfoSec services, we develop software for them to manage their reporting and their day-to-day business.
What is an InfoSec service? What's your?
It's a bit complicated because
Okay.
it's a moving part, a lot of moving parts. But usually, if you have like a security company that needs actually the other way around. If you, let's say, you have a website that needs to be pen tested, reported, something like that, our customers would usually go and ask them to file a report, a request, and they will just deliver a report in the end, tested the website, for example, or the application, something like that, for security flaws. And the software that the company where I'm at currently does is a software for managing those kinds of interactions.
Gotcha.
It's something that we've been looking at into HTMX. Not for the main projects, but other smaller projects. And seems to be paying off. Although some, let's say, the hypermedia approach is still very young and fresh, right? So for bigger projects, it still needs, I think, a little bit of development. But that depends a lot on your tech stack. But yeah, like on most of the, I can say that I joined this company this year, but on my best experience, most projects were fully migrated to Django HTMX.
Interesting. So, like, I guess I've been trying to sort of push up against the limits of HTMX just to find out what they are, because in my, a lot of the stuff I do, it sounds somewhat similar in terms of, the end needs are like, it's very data driven. It's a lot of, text. It's a lot of team collaboration. So it's about sharing data. Most of the work is done on the database side in the like core application logic. And then, you need to see it, but it's like, what I've really appreciated using HTMX for, and, before that Livewire, and I still use Livewire for some things on some projects. What I've really appreciated it for is, taking something like that and like, I have this idea in my head of how I want the UI to be. And it's like, and I base this just solely on what I would want to use. It's like, I'd like to be able to do a lookup and select something and move to the next part without refreshing and without losing, So it's like those types of, being able to just take my sort of simple version of the page and just make it much better, in my opinion, and a much smoother UI. And so far, for my personal requirements, I haven't sort of run up against a wall in what I can do. And sometimes it has gotten tricky, like a little bit. It's like nothing's ever just, it's not like some magic bullet or something like that. You still have to figure out, how you're going to divide the page up and what you're going to send and where you're going to put files and, all that kind of stuff. What would you say is like, can you think of a time where you sort of came across something and you felt like, okay, I'm going to have to rethink this, or maybe someone else made that decision?
So I can give you two examples of that. So like I said before, when you have let's say a page or a view section, let's call it, where you have a lot of client-side interactivity, there are various ways to deal with it. Alpine.js, inline JavaScript. But the problem is that with the times, like maintaining that, it's very hard. So usually the approach I take. So when we find a problem like that, usually we delegate. We still make client-side interaction with JavaScript, so DOM interactions, all that stuff, delegated to a custom Alpine directive. So isolate it.
Interesting.
I guess it goes a bit like not the same thing as HTMX, because HTMX wants the declarative way and everything on the code, but take all the interactivity to a custom Alpine directive and just declare it on the partial or in the element. And when things get really pushed, so I can tell you an example of a UI I did, I think last year. So we had like an active search. Each search had groupings. You can move around the groups like and make subgroups. So you'll have like a sortable experience. So you can sort elements, right? But with different levels. So it's not a simple just sortable UI. That plus the active search plus adding extra elements, creating them on the fly. While that can all be achieved with HTMX, it will be like a giant mess. So we just like moved it to an any run-of-the-mill front-end framework. We used Svelte because it's quick and easy to do things, and it generates small bundles, and just dropped in as a web component. So it's just an HTML tag, and it will render when the HTMX settles. But like I said, those are the biggest hurdles, I think, is too much client-side interaction, or things like, for example, we used a lot of maps, GIS software. So like Leaflet, those types of things, you need JavaScript. You can't forgo with JavaScript.
Yeah. So on that, let's just stay with that example of the sort of multi-tiered search where you need to be able to do a search. It sounds like what's happening is you want to be able to you can run your search, and when you resort, you're not necessarily pulling new data from your back end. Can you sort of trust that you have sent enough to the front end, and then at that point it's sort of you're moving it around and filtering it and sorting it with Alpine, or is that sort of component still pulling from the server?
Like that example I gave was actually like a Svelte web component with its own like micro API, because you can do it with Alpine and with HTMX, no problem. But the amount of swaps and the amount of wouldn't be very very efficient, especially, and we're not talking just about user experience, but also as a developer experience. That specific element, right, was going to be used on multiple pages with multiple types of objects. So it will be useful to have just a single source of truth and have it on a single component you can deploy on all partials.
Yep. Interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm just kind of like I've been thinking about a lot in my usage of HTMX is this kind of issue, and I think that's a good solution to it, is to, if kind of there's some of these front-end frameworks kind of have to take over your whole site, but not all of them. Svelte doesn't really have to. Alpine doesn't have to. Vue actually doesn't have to, although my experience has been that you end up going more and more to the site, so I don't really use Vue anymore. But you don't have to. You can bring it in just for a small point. So I think that's a good solution for this kind of thing. But one of the things I still really appreciate and like about Laravel Livewire is it does kind of encapsulate you can sort of you think of things in terms of a component, and that's one thing that I sometimes wish that I could do with HTMX, because with HTMX, I am sometimes creating several routes. I have sort of one object, and I have maybe 5 ways to update it. I think a search is a great example of that. A lookup, you're doing filtering on the results, you're sorting the results, you're I don't know. Besides filtering and sorting, I can't really think of other things. But you're having like a report button that shows the results in another way, or adds showing different fields and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. But what I sometimes want to be able to do, and like what Livewire gets right, is you have this like single component, and that sounds like what you're building in Svelte also, is like, okay, this is like my search component, and everything I change goes back to that search component. I don't necessarily have to declare a new route for it, make a new a new template for it. I don't have to necessarily pull in several different partials. It's like we have this one thing and many ways to change it. So, if HTMX had that kind of does that even make sense with HTMX, you think? Or is it sort of not in the realm?
I understand what you're, and also is something that I'm trying to manage. So I'm preparing a talk for the next DjangoCon Europe next year, and
Nice.
I also see that approach. So like in Django you have views. I believe that basically it's an endpoint, right? I think Laravel must have a similar concept, but you could join everything into, let's say, you can treat basically a backend view as a component. You can have, and I use that technique, basically lazy loading. If I have a page with 2 tables, right, I load the page and then I use hx trigger load to load each table independently. And I couple them as a component, right? So if I want to, let's say, someone reaches me and says, okay, so that table needs now to be displayed on another place. I'll just move the HTML element that does hx trigger load to another place, and it just loads because the entire view works as a component. And I think that's something that maybe not with Django, because I don't know if I'm seeing Django as a project move into the HTMX side. HTMX works more like a auxiliary component, but I can see maybe in other frameworks they adopt a similar style where you define components and you render them in the DOM, and the endpoint works as the logic of that component. I guess it's basically your usual React component, but the logic is on the server.
Yeah, so I do a similar thing with Laravel. Laravel has their blade templating, and so I'll divide up the page, similar kind of way. Like we've got our page, and then we have the table, and the table is a separate view. So if I need to reload that or move it, stuff like that, I'll do the same thing. I think that makes sense. But one of the issues I think that does have is that, at least right now, it's something to think about, is sometimes that table, let's say it does need to be loaded somewhere else. Do you have the data for that? Because usually a view, a template, kind of just has your layout, and like what you're passing to it, you still need to pass that separately. So what I've kind of started doing sometimes is inside that template, Laravel lets you do this. I'm not sure if Django, what they sort of allow in your templates, but you can load stuff in there. And so I'll basically check, like, if the data I need is not there, then first pull it from the database, make sure it's there, and then continue. So is that sort of a pattern you've come across or had to do?
Like the thing about the Django templates are very powerful, but they don't have let's say component composability. So you don't have like components. You just can include and extend templates, and that's something that I used for months, years, I guess. Just having like extended, for example, tables, and I will just extend the blocks that has table header, table body, But at least in the Django world, it started to show up in the last few months. A lot of packages. I can name a few like Django Cotton. It's one I use a lot now, and JinjaX, that basically allow you to create components that can be passed around and can be extended, and they work more in a component way, so that if you want to change the data, you just declare it with another slot or another content inside. But of course, it's not a native feature, but it's now popular because of HTMX, and it's getting there. So you can have like the basis for a table, for example, or for a button, and you can declare it with a single HTML tag, or in this case, a custom tag, and it will fill the data in. But that's, of course, outside of Django's internal template engine. It's external packages.
Yeah, this is relatively new in Laravel as well, and I still don't really use the components stuff that much. I guess what I'm sort of talking about more is like making database calls directly from my templates. You know, where it's like I used to go through a controller first. It would be like, you know, I'd hit the route, go to the controller, get all my data, pass that to my view, and then my view would just assume, okay, we've got all the data we need. Now I just like I'm skipping the controller sometimes, because you can just sort of, you know, go straight to the view, and then in my view I'm like loading some of the data I need, and so I'm sort of treating my view as like a single page, you know, component that has everything it needs in it. You know, I don't know if that's a pattern I should be doing exactly, but I found it very convenient.
No, like Django has the way you're talking about bypassing completely the Django has similar features. You can create custom template tags that run logic inside your template, but it's usually not used for an entire logic. It can be useful, but I think probably in terms of performance might not be the best use case. But it might, like you said, it might evolve to some kind of element like that.
Yeah. So are you, you know, does your team kind of use HTMX as well, or is it, you know, is it something that you kind of brought to the mix? You said you're relatively new there, so, you know, I'm guessing it's...
I'm there, I think 6 months, 7 months,
Okay, yeah. So you're very new.
Yeah, but when I'm the only one right now at my current company working with HTMX, but at my long-staying last company, there was, I can say, a team of 3-4 people working with HTMX, and of course, certain patterns that we shared between us. We used to go to the Django cons. We share knowledge with people. My last company actually organized some. So it wasn't really a question. It was at a certain point after we saw it really works when works well. It wasn't even a question. It was always using it.
So you said you're going to be doing a talk going forward, like at. Have you done? You said Have you done one before, or is this your first talk?
I've done one at PyCon Portugal last year.
PyCon Portugal. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
About
what
HTMX.
Was that?
It was more like common patterns and how to improve the Django experience when using HTMX, like presenting a bit of an introduction. What is HTMX? How can you use it instead of using a REST API? And let's say quick tricks to speed up development with HTMX. Maybe in Laravel, but in Django, like REST API, you define a view and it does all the actions. It delegates using the REST rules. But when you're working with regular MPAs, Django provides you with a create view, an update view, delete view, so you'll have to declare them
the resources.
All at once. But with HTMX you don't need, because you have delete on every link form, so you can just have a single view that does everything like a REST a REST view. And those kinds of tricks speed a lot of development time. And it was mostly about that. Next year, I'm thinking about presenting at DjangoCon Europe if they accept my
Yeah.
talk, right? But more advanced stuff, some stuff like we talked about the components, like getting composition testing. Also a bit about what are the, or what I believe are the right and wrong choices when tackling
Interesting.
UI. So if you do an out of band swap, if you increase the area, what should you do? Um, I have some thoughts. Let's say
Yeah. So, well,
there's yeah.
I wouldn't mind hearing some of those thoughts.
Yeah,
If you
so
got a minute.
yeah, so some of the common patterns I've actually saw before. For example, out of band swaps. Um, at first, we really didn't use them, but it's very useful for example, if you have a menu or a sidebar where something changes the state of the sidebar, you don't want to swap it, you just want to pass it with the response and it will swap the sidebar.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, small tricks like those. Um, Decisions on complex UI. When is it enough? I've had let's say a small stay at a company that I guess had hunted me because of HTMX. Since there are very few of us, I only spent there 1 month, but
Yeah.
I saw a bit of what can be the hypermedia approach gone wrong.
Interesting.
Because it was mostly Vue developers and Django, and they were used more to, I guess, progressive enhancement, if you could call it that. So taking an MPA and giving it a little bit more interaction.
All
And
right.
sometimes you had so much client-side interactivity that they will just dump all the context into Alpine and make a lot of Alpine calls. And the HTML got way too verbose and small
Yeah.
partials, like using an MPA but swapping the entire page instead of small partials, small components, like you said. And at the time, I didn't saw a lot of promise on the using HTMX on that environment, so it was something that I didn't like. Coming from a company that used HTMX intensively and had a lot of projects like in production that worked perfectly. But yeah.
Interesting. So let's see. So it seems like, just like as an overall kind of like thesis, your experience with HTMX has been like overall positive, and
Yeah.
like you like to kind of take the MPA and expand on it, but in your sort of mental model of it, once it reaches a certain level of kind of client-side interactivity, it would be, better to kind of start moving into, client-side, like a more component client-side type thing, or at least that's maybe how you've seen it so far.
I wouldn't say like that. I would say like when you're starting to work with HTMX, one thing to note, and I guess by watching Carson's interactions and reading all the notes he has on this website, it's the hypermedia way. Like you can make let's say a fake SPA with the hypermedia approach. You can just load everything you need at startup and then just swap partials or components. But the problem is that if you don't follow, I think, that philosophy, if you treat HTMX just as a enhancer and as a, or thinking of it like I guess a client side framework, that the example I said, like dumping the entire state on Alpine and just let Alpine do everything, that's not the intended use for Alpine. Uh,
Yeah.
that's like it's not the thing about using or reaching like a limit. It's the way you use it. So if you use it right or wrong, I guess right or wrong depends on the person you ask, right? But in my way, it's like it was a mess, and uh, I call it I call it the hypermedia approach, the HDA approach, because it seems to work well. But of course, there are limits. Let's say where you really need an SPA. But I guess like there's you can mix and match. Like I said, with web components, HTMX2 has improved the compatibility with web components. So view transitions, also some new features that are, I think, good for us HTMX developers. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I've been really kind of, you know, it's tough because I'm a working developer here, so I get to experiment and do fun stuff. I'm lucky to be able to do that sometimes, but it's not something I can do just all the time. But like I kind of can't wait to get a little deeper into the view transition stuff
yeah,
with the CSS, because my sense right now is, and I've done that as well, where I started to kind of bring in Alpine, and this was kind of one of my, I'm like, okay, I like Alpine. I think it's clever, and it's by the same person who did Livewire, so there's some sort of hypermedia sort of, and like you put your attributes right there. I get it, it's nice, but the problem that I've had was the same problem I had with Vue, is you're still kind of you're converting everything into this virtual DOM and just kind of showing the results of your sort of front end calculations and stuff like that. And my experience now, the more I've done that with HTMX, is the more that I'm calculating with Alpine, with Vue on the front end in the virtual DOM, the more time I spend in the virtual DOM, the worse the overall mixing of the two is. It's like, and I think maybe this is what sort of the hypermedia part of the HDA hypermedia driven approach in my mind now. I've been using less and less Alpine, and part of that is, I think, this view transitions. The stuff that I really want from Alpine is I don't know, you delete something and you get a little animation, like it's deleting it from your front end also, and maybe it sends a command to delete it, but you don't have that sort of friction of, okay, I deleted it and then something happens and I have to wait till the server comes back before I really get a new state. And so that's what I was sort of using it for. I'm more coming around to the idea that, like, I delete something happens, it grays out, I get
yep.
some disabled button, I get something like that, and then I do wait for the server. And there's actually an advantage to that, to like, that's when it really worked. That's when something happened. So I think I've been going more towards that. The Alpine in my code, I'm not gonna say it's zero now, but I mean, it's been reduced drastically, and I'm hoping to sort of use view transitions to fill that gap.
Well, my take with Alpine, because like during a lot of years, let's say the first couple of years with HTMX, didn't even use Alpine. I think Alpine, and for most of the tasks I use, it's usually for state, maybe client state that is like hide tabs, for example. Because I think if you use Bootstrap or Tailwind, for example, Bootstrap has tabs that fade in and out
Yeah.
declarative, like without any code, while Tailwind doesn't, unless you have a component library. If you have a
Yeah.
good component library, most of the need for Alpine disappears. And there are alternatives like Hyperscript and others, but they uh, like I say, very small complex stuff. For example, if you have a form, when you cancel, you want to show like a message, uh, you didn't save what you wrote. Continue, yes or no. That's an easy way to do it. But I'm gonna give you like a trickier example. If the
Yeah.
user has typed anything on the form, show that. If not, don't show it. Just cancel. That's
Yeah, yeah.
like you'll do an Ajax confirm for the simpler case, but for the other case, it will need like a lot of inline JavaScript.
Yep.
Or you can just extrapolate it to an Alpine directive and just use the effect, the use effect like in our on a React component.
Yep. Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. I almost want to like compile my own list of like the times where something like that is necessary because I think in my ideal development world, and that's probably true, it's like I want to be able to not step outside of HTMX as much as possible. When I'm like, because I know Livewire, I know Blade, I know PHP, like I feel very comfortable in this world of the code I'm writing, and the fewer kind of things I can, right now it's like adding HTMX has removed a lot of other things for me. Like it's made it, I can build sort of these, what I feel like are really nice, fancy UIs without needing to bring in too much other stuff. And I've really appreciated that about it. And I've added it to some really old projects. Projects started in 2012 that are still running on the internet, and now I can add fancy things to them because I don't need to update all the versions of everything, and it's all compatible. So I think like I really appreciate that about it, but I don't want to. I guess like I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, or if there's like what's your ideal situation with HTMX? Like, do you feel like we should always kind of keep in mind like some front end tool, whether it's Alpine or Svelte or something else, or is there a version of HTMX that kind of handles that stuff, or do you feel like those are a little bit incompatible and you should need a front end version to go along with it?
Like I said, if you have a lot of client side state, you can do it HTMX, Alpine, or another similar solution, but you're gonna have a massive inline scripting or a lot of swaps that will introduce a lot of latency. A lot of requests. I would say so far it's that was the limit of HTMX. I think with time and with improved templating systems, with more maybe like we've seen focused in hypermedia entire frameworks, maybe that will go away. But I would say like the limit so far was the client side thing. On my experience, I saw the other day using was it WebSockets to constantly updating the page using hypermedia.
Oh yeah, was this the Delaney.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So he's using the server sent events. Kind of an event-driven approach, opening the request but never closing it, and then having it just return data over that open request. Which I still haven't tried yet.
Yeah, but an approach like that, like it seems like it could be, because if you're constantly connected to the server, there is basically no need for client state. You're always in sync. Yeah. I think that we'll get to something like that probably, and it will eliminate most of the problems on the client side, at least.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean that was Delaney's sort of argument as well. He started with HTMX and kind of built his own Datastar system, datastar.dev, to sort of solve that problem of not needing to constantly pull or not needing to go to the server every time. It's like, you just sort of have a connection open with the user, and the server can send whatever it wants. which
Yeah,
I,
certain applications. I can give you an example on my freelance stuff. Uh, a car washing booking application. So people book during the day, right? And people go to work. They leave the laptop open with the bookings there. And my current situation, I'm not using HTMX actually on that one. It's just polling every 30 seconds for new bookings.
yeah,
Having that direct approach, like where you're constantly refreshing the data, I think it's the next step, at least in
yeah.
some environments. Yeah.
No, I mean, and I was, I'll just say, completely convinced on the speed by him. You know, when he was talking about the way that kind of works and the efficiency of it and the speed you get, like that's kind of to me, you can get that sort of SPA. You know, you click something and an event happens and it sends that to the server, and then your stream is updated of stuff. My questions with that, and like this is just my own not knowing how to do it yet, is like how easy is, you know, right now if I couldn't replace my whole app with a setup like that, because I've got all these routes, I've got all these views, the structure is just totally different. I'm not using events, you know, I don't have server events, I don't have an event bus. Like those are concepts that I think, you know, obviously they have these huge benefits, but they're not how any of my apps work right now. So you know, I don't see it realistically for myself as replacing those yet, but it almost seems like if you could take, rather than taking a component like you're talking about and using Svelte, if there was some HTMX server sent event solution that opened up some component and then allowed you to kind of stream that from the server and handle events, maybe that's something that's...
I'll think that depends a lot on more on the backend framework than on the HTMX side. But yeah, like you said, that's I think a completely different architecture. The way of doing things will be a lot different, and it's a new approach, but maybe it's not well developed yet.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I only sort of recently started hearing about event sourcing and which is I guess what this is called, you know, some of it, and I like the theory. I do like the theory of it. You know, it's like you keep track of all the events and then you sort of decide what each event does to your site, and then you send that out to the user, or you update your application or your database, you know, based on those events. But it's such a paradigm shift in the sort of way that apps are generally built that, you know, I'm not quite ready to. I don't quite see how I can implement some of that stuff yet, but I am intrigued.
It's a very interesting concept, but I would say it's not like HTMX on the first couple of years was just a concept, I guess, not maybe on small projects, but on real companies, real big projects, was just a concept, and it eventually went to I think a good way, because like I said, our take on HTMX when I was at a company was weird at first. This just seems to paste HTML blocks inside what is this doing, but after, like, we don't need to do an entire API, serialize everything. It just gives us what we need, and after testing it, and like we talked about view transitions, the support for WebSockets, I think the future is quite bright.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been asking you about the limitations, and so we've been talking about the parts of HTMX that it can't do a lot. But I mean, the reason I'm even talking about it is because for me, the parts that it can do have been incredible and have kind of taken over the way that I'm building applications a lot of times. And yeah, what do you think? Like, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this just off the top of your head, but what do you think, like, big picture, what is the HTMX community kind of, is there anything that you feel like the community or the, is there anything that's missing that you think the community needs or that would be helpful for people starting out with HTMX? Or something along those lines.
I think like the problem with things like that is I last year, I believe, I ended up doing a course for full stack web development.
Like taking a course or
no,
creating a course?
Giving a course. Yeah.
Giving a course, okay.
For college students. So they have their web development classes, but they don't get the full picture, like infrastructure, like development. Yeah.
You need to hear it from somebody who's in the trenches every day.
Yeah, basically something like that. And it was hard to show them, like it wasn't a main part of the course, right? But in the end, like I showed them, like I'm teaching you guys like how to do the front end, APIs, but there's another approach, and it's hard to show. I try to show them like the way HTMX benefits you not having to do an API, since you're not doing a mobile app, just a web applications or a website. I think the message is a bit hard to pass, especially for people that have touched front-end frameworks. I hear that some students go straight to React. They don't even almost know vanilla JavaScript, and they'll go straight to React or Next, and they lose a bit of concept of how a backend works. They just have endpoints, and they know that the endpoints give them data. And I've seen some people work like that. When I started doing web development, I was still in college. I started with vanilla PHP, doing PHP database access, like everything without any framework. Then I switched to Django. So I guess I taken the route to know how it is, like from the start to the end. I know the entire path.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue with HTMX, I guess, is also the limitations, and trying to show people that are used to the SPA approach that maybe there's another way. I guess that's the message that Carson needs to give with his memes.
Well, yeah, I think he's been doing. I think he's been doing a nice job making the case that there is another way, which I probably wouldn't have never heard about it if he wasn't on. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like just that big picture. The younger developers, didn't sort of start from the back end. They're starting where in their mental model of the web is a client-side app with an API, base.
Yeah.
That with endpoints. So kind of introducing another mental model is difficult. So
yeah, like
it sounds like
I'm relatively young, right? I'm 26, but
okay, yeah.
When I was in college and learning web development, they still teach us like XML HTTP request, although fetch already exists, stuff like that. But nowadays, like if they're already learning directly React or other frameworks like that, I guess they don't even get the picture of how the DOM works and what kind of interactions is done, like in an HTTP request flow, some things like that. And I think it's one of the challenges for HTMX, that, and because it's a very radical approach to the standards, I guess big companies can be a bit skeptical about taking a risk on switching something from React to HTMX, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've got the sense, if you're looking for something really slick, and, it's easy to find React examples. You can find sort of React component libraries, you can find apps made, and I think, that's, I've also been kind of on the lookout, and I've seen some that I like to sort of, see more kind of, here's something really cool built with HTMX. Just because that sort of inspires people. It gives them some trust, that this is possible. So, I've sort of thought of it as like, more examples of stuff, and specifically stuff. I think there's a natural. The crowd, a lot of people who are part of the who are using HTMX are maybe a little older, and so some of that retro style kind of appeals. And I think Carson's like that, and I'm a bit like that too. I really don't mind a lot of the sort of retro web look and feel, because I feel like there was a certain amount of utility to it. But for getting more people on board, there's no reason you can't have a more modern look, to an HTMX app.
Yeah, like like we talked, the view transitions API, the SPA feel. I think that's one of the perks of the hypermedia way, is you can build an SPA, a sort of SPA. Like if you use the Ajax indicator well, the transitions, the CSS animations, if it is polished and done well, it can, like, for most users, it will pass as an SPA.
Yeah, and you don't get, SPAs have some trade-offs, some negative trade-offs. So it's like you can get the SPA look and feel, in my opinion, without those sort of negative trade-offs of having to switch all your auth and all your kind of client-side routing. And like there's a nightmare of data, issues when you try to duplicate everything on the client side. And people in the SPA world are just kind of used to that as like, oh yeah, that's just what you have to do. And it's not easy, and it's not fun. And it's like, you can just avoid that.
Double the problems, double the code, exactly. Double the problems. And like, especially for small teams where a company can't handle, like, or most of the work is just backend. HTMX revolutionized like the way of thinking.
Yeah. No, and it's like exactly you said, double the problems. It's like every single validation you're doing, you've got to do it twice. Like you're going to do it on the server anyway, so why not just just do it once and be done with it.
That's the problem of I would say regarding the teaching and the showing, like the HTMX, is that some concepts are getting lost. Like the server does the validation. The server should be the source of truth. Like anyone can go inspect, go to DevTools and change stuff. And HTMX bypasses everything because you store the state on the server.
Yep. Yeah. Excellent. So and I guess anything else you kind of want to plug? So you may be doing a talk. You've submitted a talk for the upcoming Python or upcoming DjangoCon EU.
Yeah, they haven't opened the submissions for.
Okay. So you're thinking
for
about
the next year's DjangoCon, but I'll try to have it done the next few months. And if another PyCon on some maybe European country opens the call for proposals, I'll probably also submit there.
Great. So if you have any videos or anything like that, any like blog posts, links, send them over, and I'll include them along with the show notes. But yeah,
sure.
And the next one's going to be kind of on it. If you do another talk, you're thinking it's going to be sort of advanced HTMX patterns.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I saw a lot of my first talk about HTMX. I gave a small talk about Django forms, but my first big talk was about HTMX, more of an introductory stage. And I think most people that go to conferences already heard a lot about introduction to HTMX and really want to know what happens in the trenches.
They want to know, once you start using it, can this really do what you need it to do? Yep.
Yeah.
I like that. Awesome. Well, Lucas, thank you very much for joining today.